I call on Government Order of the Day number 1.
Adjourn debate on the second reading of the Appropriation 2016-17 Estimates Bill and the amendment proposed to it.
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr. Speaker, the 2016 budget of Bill English is a truly excellent budget. And how do we know that, Mr. Speaker? We know that because of the way the opposition has reacted to the budget, Mr. Speaker. Instead of challenging the budget, instead of actually going through the budget, instead of questioning the budget, they have decided to do a diversion, Mr. Speaker. A little diversion in the political environment, Mr. Speaker. And in late-breaking, stop-the-presses political news of the last 24 hours, Mr. Speaker, Labor and the Greens have announced that they're going to campaign against the national government at the next election, Mr. Speaker. That's the news. They've decided they're going to campaign against the government at the next election, Mr. Speaker. That is the news. They're not going to share policy. They're not going to have any arrangements around seats. There'll be no commitment afterwards. No commitment afterwards. They're just going to campaign against the government. But don't take it from me, Mr. Speaker. They went on the television this morning to explain what they were about with this big announcement yesterday. And they said, Mr. Henry said to them, so nothing's changed at all, nothing changes at all. And Andrew Little says, no. Actually, what the agreement does is confirm what's been happening for the last few months, Mr. Speaker. And he goes, Mature says, the first step is telling people that we're going to work together. And Mr. Henry says, but you must have had a discussion, you must have worked together to now. And Materia says, we've actually been working together for the last 18 months. But today we're announcing we're working together, Mr. Speaker. So there you have it, Mr. Speaker. The Labor Party and the Green Party have announced that they're going to campaign at the next election against the government, Mr. Speaker. And the Labor Party has given the Greens a rose. They have. Don't just take it from me. They literally tweeted love hearts to each other on their Twitter accounts, Mr. Speaker. They tweeted love hearts to each other on the Twitter account. They have given the Greens a rose, Labor has, which makes Winston Naz. It does make Winston Naz. And I feel a bit for Naz, Mr. Speaker. I feel a bit for Naz. He's been left on the...
Order. Point of order. Right Honourable Winston.
It is a long requirement in this House that you cannot refer to someone by their first name. And in his case, you should put Sir in front of it.
Order. No, I want to make a comment. Order.
Sit down.
Order. There have been a number of times in the last 2 days where ministers particularly have referred to members by their Christian names only. It is unacceptable. It's against standing orders. Members will be addressed by their Christian name and surname, or as Mr. or Ms. by their surnames only. We cannot have the informality of speaking to members across the House by their Christian names alone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
That makes the Right Honourable Winston Peters Naz. And that's sad for Winston Peters, but probably sadder for Naz, to be fair, Mr. Speaker. So there you have it, the announcement that wasn't, except there was one interesting thing about this announcement, that despite the fact that there was nothing new, there was one small thing that was new. Despite the fact that they said all bets are off after the election and there is no deal after Election Day, they felt obliged to say that Grant Robertson would be the Finance Minister if they were. Who was feeling insecure, Mr. Speaker? Who required his leader to go out and speak for him because he was feeling a bit insecure, Mr. Speaker? And what we know, Mr. Speaker, is that this discussion occurred last Thursday night. It occurred last Thursday night. The two of them, Andrew Little and Grant Robertson, were sitting having a beer, Mr. Speaker, on YouTube, as it happens. They were sitting having a beer on YouTube, and Mr Little said to Grant, I'm going to announce a deal with the Labour Party, with the Green Party, and Grant said, well, that's okay, although I'm not sure.
Order. I've just mentioned to the House, we cannot have the informality of referring to members simply by their Christian name. The Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Thank you, Mr. And so Grant Robertson said to Andrew Little that I need to be announced as the finance guy as part of this deal, while drinking his unfinishable beer that he had on the YouTube video, Mr. Speaker. The beer that never finished. The beer that just kept going and going, Mr. Speaker. So anyway, Grant Robertson is the only thing we know out of this deal is that Grant Robertson would be their finance guy because he was worried that he wouldn't be.
What about Julianne?
So I worry about Julianne. What about Julianne Genter? What's happened to Julianne? Julianne Genter.
Yes.
Julianne Genter has been forgotten, Mr. Speaker. She has been forgotten in this. She has become Erin. She has been thrown under a bus, Mr. Speaker, by this Labour Greens deal. Julianne Genter has been thrown under a bus by this deal, which is ironic. It is ironic, actually, because she's in favour of public transport, but she was thrown under the bus, Mr. Speaker, by this deal. Mr. Speaker, the whole show that we've seen in the last 24 hours is much less than it seems. It is The Bachelor, but there is no happy ending for these guys, Mr. Speaker. They're doing it because they can't respond to Bill English's budget, which is a strong budget that invests in a growing economy, Mr. Speaker, that delivers results for New Zealanders, that invests in innovation, health and public services. Mr. Speaker, this is a strong budget, and the reaction from Labour and the Greens was absolutely worse than pitiful. It's a complete diversion. It's an announcement about nothing, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Grant Robertson.